is neat about the executive track here is, so we have the practitioner track where we're talking about all of the technical tips and tricks of the trade. But here, I mean, at the end of the day, you can nerd out all day long. And we talked about security as a process. Purple team is very much process oriented versus what you would see in a traditional red team. And no one's going to let you do those things unless you can demonstrate that value to the business to let you, because there's more work involved in bringing all those folks around the table. And then this next talk that's coming up is a panel of the VC community, which goes to, of course, where does the investment come into the industry to drive the innovation in products that come to market to be able to do these things? And that's a key element of this, is a market-driven strategy.
I mean, the most exciting thing, I don't get excited about venture capitalists, to be completely honest. But the most exciting thing about the next talk is the fact that one of the speakers has got the second name Dragon. And I'm all about that. I love dragons. Who doesn't love a dragon? I'm wearing a t-shirt with a dragon on it.
Yeah, Greg Draken from 406 out of Boston. We also have Chris Steed from Paladin Capital. And I'm missing one.
Sid Trivedi.
Oh, Sid Trivedi from Foundation Capital. And then that's moderated by Ron Gula, who was a co-founder of Tenable. Everybody knows Tenable. That if you haven't seen a Nessus product, I don't know what you're doing. And he now has his own VC firm that he created. Because, you know, when you get to co-found a company that gets listed on the exchange, you know, that's success.
It certainly is.
All right, I see Ron and Chris are in our attendee list. They're welcome to join for pre-show banter if you like. Got another 2 minutes to get started. Hey, there's Ron. Oh, going full purple. I love it. I see Greg is also there. Oh, well, we can't see you, so, you know, you're not our benchmark. The disembodied voice from England. Ron, Chris, Greg. Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you, Ron.
Oh, wow. I can see you now.
And we see Sid.
I'm on. Hold on. Am I on video, or do I need to?
You are not on video. I just sent you a webcam request. We can hear you though.
Do that.
All the
Chris,
way
what are you
from
wearing, Chris?
the country of Silicon Valley. There we go.
What's that? I got my Duke hoodie on here.
Duke. All right. All right. Purple's coming through.
Feel so uncool without a hood.
How are y'all doing today?
Good.
Doing good. Happy Friday.
Thank you. So we were just talking about the value of this panel. I mean, we have this executive track because it's so important for the technical practitioners to understand the context of the business. You can learn all the tips and tricks that you want, but if the business isn't going to let you do them, and particularly Purple Team process is a much more business-oriented focus for risk assessment, you really need to do that. And then the other part of this is a lot of the innovation is going to be driven by what's allowed to come into the marketplace, which is where you gentlemen come into play with helping drive investment into that process in the form of products that help make this job easier. And I think with that, we're going to hand it over to Ron to moderate the panel.
All right. Hey,
put your questions in the Q&A in the GoToMeeting, and Ron, you should be able to see those.
Yep.
All right.
Awesome.
There's yours.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you, Bryson. Thank you, team members of SANS and Scythe, and everybody who's taken their Friday the 13th day out to join us for the Purple Team Summit. I'm honored to have 3 leaders in cybersecurity investing with us today. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves real quick, but in my panel, I've got Chris Steed in the upper right, I've got Sid Trivedi bottom right, and I've got Greg Draken in bottom left. So let's go in the order clockwise, starting with Chris. Tell us about you and where you're from and what you hope to discuss today.
Yeah, absolutely. Born and raised in the DMV on the Maryland side, went to high school in Virginia, went to middle school in DC. And so I've experienced a little bit of the DC metro area, throughout not only my childhood, but then my career. I'm the Chief Investment Officer of Paladin Capital Group, been with the firm for 13 years. The firm focuses on dual-use technologies, bringing best of breed from government over to commercial and then commercial over to government. And so we invest at the intersection point between those two worlds, leveraging a lot of the technology know-how of some of the individuals around our table to go in really early, help entrepreneurs understand how to build a business from the ground up, and then work with government and commercial at the same time, bringing mission assurance goals as well as business goals to the forefront.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. Sid?
Sorry, I was on
Sid.
mute there. Hey, Ron. Hey, Chris. Hey, Greg. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. My name is Sid Trivedi. I'm one of the partners at Foundation Capital. We're an early stage venture firm based out here in the Bay Area where I am today, a rainy morning in San Francisco. And we invest in seed Series A and Series B companies. We typically lead those rounds. We invest across a broad category of sectors within technology, although I spend most of my time focused on cybersecurity and IT investing here at Foundation.
Awesome, thank you. And Greg?
Great, good to see everyone. Thanks for having me. Greg Dracon, I'm a partner with 406 Ventures. We're in Boston, where we focus on enterprise IT, typically leading Series A rounds, and I lead our cybersecurity practice. I've been at 406 14 years, focused on cybersecurity, spent a couple years prior to that at another fund in DC, so I know the DC area pretty well. Again, focused on cyber, and prior to that, I'm a reformed electrical engineer, having spent almost a dozen years in industry, writing encryption algorithms. So I've touched cyber for 27, 28 years, and now I'm excited to still be looking at innovative solutions in the cyber industry. And working
That's phenomenal. So thank you guys for taking time out to kind of share with us. For those who don't know my background, I'm Ron Gula. I used to be the CEO and co-founder of Tenable. I run Gula Tech Adventures. If you ever see me moderate a panel, I try not to give my opinions and stuff. I try to get these three fine gentlemen to share us with theirs. So I've got a whole bunch of questions teed up, and this is probably going to be a little bit more technical than most VC panels, but these guys are pretty smart. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with a question about the Mitre attack framework and the NIST cybersecurity framework. So as cybersecurity investors, as much as you guys hear about Mitre attack, a NIST cybersecurity framework, do you actually use it? And Greg, I'll start with you this time. Do you actually use it when you're making investments in your portfolios or choosing what to invest or not invest in?
I would say it depends. So being an investor in cyber solutions and fairly early, I would say many of them are really just putting basic controls in place. There's also, I think, a trend now that architecturally, a lot of these companies are trying not to hold sensitive information at all. So they're very different than the cybersecurity solutions of old, where you are a great treasure trove of secrets. So if you're completely stateless and not touching customer information, then they have just very basic practice in place for cyber. They don't go as deep as Mitre or NIST. It's probably more the CIS top 20. When we're looking at later stage companies, or if my counterparts in digital health and cloud and data are investing, we do look at whether or not they've actually built some controls in place. They often don't yet have CISOs until they get to, say, 100 employees, then they start to really get serious. But I would say Mitre and NIST are kind of on the higher end, CIS top 20, kind of basic. And when we invest in true startups, they're not thinking about it yet, but they know they will have to. Excellent.
Sid, what are your thoughts?
I completely agree with Greg, and I put it into two buckets. We obviously have companies that are at much later stage, i.e. 50 million of annual revenue and above. So these are companies that are getting to the stage where they do need to seriously consider how they look at protecting their customers' data. In those companies, you usually have a situation where you're hiring a director of security or a VP of security, and in particularly those cases, I do have conversations with that individual who's effectively the CISO around how they think about NIST and Mitre. In terms of kind of our early stage companies, exactly like Greg, we're less focused, obviously, just given all the other things you have to deal with. And you remember this, obviously, Ron, from the early days at Tenable. It's just hard to focus as well, on the basic requirements. I'd say one area, and it's not Mitre or NIST, where companies at all stages care about, meeting requirements is SOC 2 certification. It's one of those things that you have to meet to be able to sell to customers. So if there's anything my early stage founders, particularly our firm's early stage founders that don't focus on cybersecurity and IT, that's one thing that they always want to talk to me about. Hey, how do I get SOC 2 certified? What's the quickest way for me to do this?
Great point.
Cool. And Chris.
Yeah, I actually go back to the Lockheed kill chain model, and this was about I don't know, 7, 8 years ago that we took a look at it and built a portfolio around it to fit into each of the buckets, those types of defensive solutions that we thought would be adoptable, not from a technical standpoint, but from an operation standpoint inside of these organizations. And what we found is organizations generally wanted something that was more technically stable at that very early stage. And even though you could buy a package of all of these tools and technologies, that may be great from an investment in a portfolio perspective, but for the buyer of that, that doesn't solve their problem. That doesn't, get to, what they need to solve for on the compliance aspect, as well as the governance aspect, and more, we're asking the question around privacy controls like GDPR. Have you been built compliant with that? California has privacy controls coming out, or I believe maybe you've already been out. That's right. And so, we look more and more at stuff like that nowadays, knowing full well that the buyers, it's got to be Jax or better when you have to fit into those technical control platforms.
Excellent. And we can come back to this if we want to talk about it a bit more. So the next question will go to Sid first. So you guys have been in the business for a long time, and the concept of IT risk has kind of changed. And I'm sure the companies you invested in, you probably worked with some great founders who pushed the envelope of what does it mean to kind of have IT security risk measurement. So my question is how often are you getting pitched by a new company where their concept of cybersecurity is so much different than what we've known for the past 20 years? Have you seen gaps like that, either lack of understanding or just people pushing the envelope?
Yeah, it's a great question, Rod. And to add to that, the firm's been around for 25 years. We've been investing in cyber since 2001. So almost 20 years of investing in cyber. And you're absolutely right. There are just a lot of companies in the space. And many times, I'm sure Greg and Chris will agree with me on this topic. When we have a new company come in, it's very hard for us to distinguish how company A is different from company B, whether that be in our portfolio or not. I mean, just in the identity security market today, we have 4 companies, that in our portfolio that are, going and tackling different parts of identity security. So it's definitely a problem that we think about. What is an area, a gaping hole that we're not looking at, that we're not concerned about? I'd say that not a lot of examples where you go into a meeting and you say, oh my goodness, this is a vector of attack that we really haven't thought about. Most of the time, it's a vector of attack that we're all aware of, but we just have ignored. And I'll give the fantastic example of hardware security. For a very long time, as a community, we ignored hardware security. We said, hey, this is a problem, but not as big of a problem as people think it to be. Obviously, in the last 5 years, and this was in part pushed by certain attacks, not Petya and WannaCry being 2 examples of this, Spectre and Meltdown being another, adjacent but different example. Those types of attacks really kind of pulled the industry to think about other areas of security, and particularly hardware security. And there's obviously been particularly a number of companies in the OT security market that have really grown. And Ron, you're obviously an investor in Dragos, and I know Rob well, and I'm sure others do on this panel. That was an area, sitting in that meeting and hearing Rob's pitch, I said, hey, I've been ignoring hardware security for a long time, and OT security in particular for a really long time, but maybe this is the time for this market to really grow. But there are very few examples where you sit in a meeting and you say, this is a vector of attack that we really haven't thought about, and I have completely ignored.
Chris, any comments on that?
Yeah, we have a heavy focus on the operations of security. We try not to think of it as cybersecurity as much as we do security in the cyber age. where we're really looking at those tools that, yes, they serve a security function, but they also help to defend the original business proposition as to why organizations went digital in the first place. And so I agree, there is just such a huge influx of companies trying to address each of these problems that come up. And, the feedback that we get from chief information security officers is they've had it. They're pulling their hair out. They don't know what they need to buy and how they need to buy it. However, they have invested in people. And if you can make those people better, more adept, even if their primary function is not a security function, at helping to defend an organization, we're finding a lot of additional pockets of budgetary spend outside of that chief information security officer. And so that's how we think about a lot of and I agree with Sid. It's really hard to tell the difference between company A and company Z, especially when 9 out of 10 of them are all saying the same thing. We stop 99.99% of the problems. Well, if that was true and you're all getting adopted, then the problem wouldn't be getting worse, but it's getting exponentially worse. And so we've got to be thinking about it, I think, differently. And I know by way of the investments that both, Greg and Sid have done, they probably share that opinion about pulling out your hair when trying to figure out the difference between A to Z.
Well said. Well said. Greg, any other comments, or do you want the next question?
No, I'll build very quickly on something. I think Sid and Chris covered a lot of ground there. The only thing I'd add is, as we know, adversaries are incredibly opportunistic and they follow the money. So the one vector I've seen, ignoring the technology and the microsegments now that have formed versus it used to just be network application and endpoint, we now are seeing cyber become mainstream and come down into smaller companies. So the buyers have become less technical, the users are less technical. So I'm seeing a big shift in how cyber products need to be implemented and sold for companies that now understand not only do they need to defend, everyone now accepts that we're going to be breached at some point. So let me put in the basics, but then let me figure out when I'm bleeding and how to stop that. And it plays right into, I know this is the Purple Team Summit, but active defense, I think, is, in my opinion, one of the best shifts that we've seen in the past few years. Let's actually attack ourselves or give people the ability to show us what an attacker would see so that I can test my stack. And that, to me, I think, is a giant shift in the past couple of years that we're going to take advantage of.
Well, let's build on that. So Chris, you get the next question, but I think, Greg, this will be a follow-on to what you were just saying. So feel free to talk about companies that you guys have invested in here. We don't have any sort of no vendor. If you invest in somebody and you have a thesis, go for it, right? So the question is, and this, Chris, will be to you first, as I said, what technologies for understanding IT risk are you most excited about as an investor? And I'm assuming that the ones you've invested in, you're the most excited about.
Yes, and yes. Well, as we're looking forward, the mindset, is surely active defense, but it's also moving into things like defending forward. How do we persistently engage outside of our four walls in a legally conscious way with the proper authority to be able to shut down an attack at the source? And so those types of tools are the ones that are getting me the most excited. Then safety tech. We've heard a lot about security, and we all want to bring trust back into the equation, but we can't get trust until we also keep people safe. And we got to keep people safe in cyberspace in order to make it a trusted place, not just secure. And so those are the two areas that I'm the most excited about right now. And I think, and Greg said it really well. You have to understand how to attack in order to understand how to defend. And the best analogy that I have for Purple Team was given to me by General Ken Minahan, who said that the way that we need to think about this is not American football, it's European football. You're playing offense and defense at the same time, regardless of where you are on the field. And so we're loving that influx of technologies, and it brings a lot of people out of very technical organizations and governments wanting to build around that concept.
Very good. Greg, any specific companies or technologies that you're excited about?
Yeah, there are too many to mention on this call. The last couple I think that are really neat, that one obviously is very right down the center here, is a company in our portfolio called Randori, which does help you not only see what attackers see. So they do reconnaissance on an environment from the outside, and then they built attack platform to basically nation state level attacks to attack yourself. And the word randori is actually from Japanese martial arts, and it means practice like you fight. And just to what Chris was saying, I think the football analogy is a great one, but for too long we've only been defenders, and that is not a fair fight. So we need to figure out how do we get into a scrimmage and get that purple team going and see what we're gonna, how we can stop and identify attacks. So that's one. And then in general, I'd say the sprawl of cloud services, IaaS, SaaS, PaaS, I think has left CISOs just bewildered with how they can understand identities, assets, et cetera. And we're back to a point where we don't even know what we're defending, let alone trying to put tools in place. So having them, there are technologies out there now. We've made an investment in the space in a company called Sevco that helps you correlate all of those assets into one place and understand how they interconnect and how they touch each other, so you can really put some defense on and rewind the tape and see what happened if you're doing IR.
Awesome. Sid, same question.
Yeah, like Chris and Greg, there are too many to name, but following up on what Greg just mentioned, the area that I'm personally very excited about today is cloud security. I think the transformation from on-prem to cloud has been happening for a long time, and everybody on this call is aware of that. Clearly, COVID has changed how fast that transformation is happening. The number of Fortune 500s, which have been very apprehensive of moving to the cloud, mostly because boards have been worried about the impact that causes. And I think the pandemic and the stay-at-home orders that were put in place globally have shown the value of the cloud and the value of the cloud versus on-prem infrastructure, particularly around flexibility of infrastructure to tune up and down services as you need, as your demand goes up and down. And then secondly, around adopting new technologies quickly. When you have a physical box and you can't enter a data center because there's a stay-at-home order, it makes it very hard for you to innovate quickly. When you have your cloud instances, it makes it very quick to be able to put in those new technologies quickly. So because that transformation is happening a lot faster than one would have expected, and clearly it was always happening, it is obvious that the single biggest reason that people have been worried about moving to the cloud has been around security. And if that's the case, then obviously making investments in that market is going to be very interesting. And we've done 2 investments in the past: Fortanix and CloudKnox. Fortanix in the runtime encryption space, CloudKnox now in a new category called Cloud Identity Entitlement Management. And my newest investment, Stacklet, which others I believe know about on this call, is in managing governance and security policies in the cloud. And effectively, they are commercializing an open source project called Cloud Custodian to be able to do this. So I do believe that there's a number of other investments that are available as a result of this cloud transformation. And there's probably going to be an impact because of this around application security and the market that obviously Ron Tenable is in.
Excellent. So if we were doing happy hour, I'd have to drink one for Tenable and drink one for COVID, right? Buzzword, buzzword, buzzword. So sort of an analogy to that question is, are there technologies, and we've kind of touched on some of the hardware security, for example, but I'll throw out a couple, but are there technologies that were either too early or just didn't think were going to make a difference? And the 2 that I was going to add would be the like the API security. We've seen like exits like Sitel to Hewlett Packard, which was like API microservice type security, as well as stuff like Protego, which exited to Checkpoint, 100% Lambda security type company. These are great companies, great tech, but the adoption wasn't huge. So Greg, are we seeing anything like that you're concerned about or had to steer clear of?
I would actually argue both of those were almost before their time. I don't think we've seen how big that's going to be, because if you think about the migration to the cloud as Sid described, I still think we're in early innings. And I was on the board of Cloud Health for a long time, and it became a pretty good sized company, but we used to estimate that we're still penetrated like 10%. And big companies are still slowly getting there. But if you move to the cloud, as you know, when you're on-prem, you own the hardware, you own the operating system, you own your applications, you own the network, you secure all that, and you have visibility. You go to the cloud to an infrastructure as a service provider, you spec the hardware, you spec the OS, but you probably don't manage patching, you don't manage firmware, you don't manage the network. So all you have left are applications on top. you go even further, you mentioned serverless, function as a service. You now own very, very little, only API, only things like Vertigo did. And as companies migrate down that path, I think we're going to find more and more going into pure application, both runtime and not, just trying to figure out what's being accessed. And that's why I think we're seeing the shift to identity and authentication, because you're losing control over everything that's down the stack. So I think they were, long way of saying, I think those companies were early in an industry that's going to be huge.
Yeah, Sid, same question.
I completely agree with Greg. I think, you know, this happens time and time again in security, where you have technologies that are just a little too early. And we've all invested in companies where we've said, oh my goodness, this is a fantastic technology. And crud, I was way too early into this market. I think that the thing that we as investors have to recognize, and founders do too, to build on what Greg just mentioned, is, you know, sometimes you might have the right technology, you just didn't come in at the right time. And recognizing that allows you to kind of deal with the failure. If your company ends up failing, you have to recognize, hey, sometimes this has nothing to do with me. It has to do with picking, you know, the product and the market at the right time. And Protego is an example of that. You know, certainly it wasn't a terrible exit, but it wasn't, I assume, what the founders and the investors envisioned for the company. And I do believe there's a lot of ground to grow, particularly around API security, as we see this transformation happen. I mean, for context, today amongst the Global 2000, I'd say about 20 or 30% of their total infrastructure is in the cloud. Like, it's still very, very early days, as Greg mentioned. We are not even close to 50%.
So Chris, same question, but I'm going to modify it slightly. So if there's a technology or a company that you think is maybe useful but too early, you know, what have you seen? And then how do you say no to those people while still encouraging them?
Well, there are many ways to say no while still encouraging them. And, you know, I'll also say, you know, I as an investor would rather be, you know, too early and realize a return than to just be dead wrong. You know, and I think what both, you know, Greg and Sid just said is exactly that. You know, those are going to be core functional building blocks for the market that then develops around those assets. And then knowledge of why those assets were bought, you know, and what the business reasons were for, you know, those acquirers, you know, is only going to then lead to a spillover effect into other categories or adjacent categories, you know. And so I think it was Sid that said, you know, you see this a lot in security. And when it also comes to, you know, trying to keep a company positive and moving them forward, you know, especially when you're deeply emotionally involved, you know, we never invest to lose money. You know, we do get emotionally involved, you know, and when you do that, you know, the best thing is always to try to create that safe place for the entrepreneur. It's already hard enough to leave their big job, you know, or their high paying job, you know, or their previously really important job, you know, and going into that entrepreneurial mindset is an incredibly risky endeavor. It's not something that I would do right now, you know, but a lot of people do, you know, and so things are going to go wrong. Creating that safe place so that you can both tackle those problems and then create solutions, even if it's not the, you know, the 10x return that you were hoping for, $1 billion category maker, you know, getting through those times together, you know, not only gains intelligence operationally, you know, but you really do help a, you know, an entrepreneur that might be struggling.
Excellent. So just a reminder to folks watching, if you've got questions, you'd be surprised how often, if you're doing red teaming or blue team, you know, necessity is the mother of invention. You want to suggest an idea, or why haven't we seen a product in this case, or just a general question about how this stuff works as an investor, feel free. Next question goes to Sid, and you've kind of touched on this already. So when I look at, you know, the Mitre attack framework, when I look at the NIST cybersecurity framework, you know, top 20 controls, that sort of thing, it's pretty much traditional last 20 years of security, right? Patching, IP addresses, access control list, authentication. But when we go to the cloud, the dimensions and the schema completely changes, right? The IP addresses go away, you know, concepts of perimeters go away. So the specific question is, are you seeing companies, you already mentioned one or two, are you seeing specific companies that are adopting things like Mitre attack and just general red and blue purple team concepts to SaaS applications and DevOps environments?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say while they are not highlighting this as the reason, behind kind of their innovation, there are definitely companies that are thinking about how do we use Mitre attack framework in this new environment, particularly on the response side. I have a company called Anvalogic, which is basically providing a way for SOC analysts to manage content. So effectively, as people know on the call today, SOC analysts will create playbooks on how to respond to certain attacks. The way that they do this, it's actually pretty difficult to do, but they end up kind of creating these notes, in their own manner, whether it be in a Word document or some other application. And it's very hard to transfer that knowledge, both internally and externally, to other organizations. And this company, Anvalogic, is helping to kind of do that, make that transfer a lot easier by creating a platform that these analysts can use, both for internal and external information sharing. But on top of that, what they've layered in is the Mitre attack framework to be able to say, hey, if you are building out a playbook for this type of APT attack, what parts of Mitre attack are you looking at, and how are you kind of mitigating potential risk that's out there in the framework? So, you have those discrete examples. There isn't today a kind of a company that I have seen, and maybe Chris and Greg will disagree, that goes and pitches, hey, we will solve the Mitre attack framework for cloud native companies. Like, it's just is unrealistic, and it's not really the right way of thinking about things. But there's certainly companies which are adopting the framework into their platform to make it easier for security analysts to be able to use that, to be able to figure out, hey, how much of the framework am I meeting as I move my infrastructure to the cloud?
Chris, same question. Mitre attack, red, blue, purple team operations with containers, SaaS, and cloud.
Yeah, we when we look at these types of controls, for a company, let's say like Scythe, the platform and the concept is built around the mindset of enabling an organization to customize their security operation in a way that aligns with some of those Mitre controls or NIST controls. And for so many of these organizations, I think somebody said it earlier, these mid-market organizations, they just don't have the skills, the expertise, and so it really does need to be made, number one, really easy for them, and then align with those business goals. For a small manufacturing company in the Midwest, do they need to have an Expel, one of our managed detection and response companies, to come in and manage that entire infrastructure? The answer is no, but they do need something. And given that part of the market, forms, most of our critical infrastructure base, those are the organizations that really need this stuff the most. And so I said it earlier, aligning with those types of controls, whether you're attacking, cloud native environments, on-prem environments, what have you, you've got to do that as Jacks are better. You have to think about those things, because if you get lost in the minutia of trying to answer that question, you're not going to get bought. That product is not going to get sold. So you do have to align with that. And, again, you look at something, that is new in our portfolio called Arius Risk. This is a company that comes out of Spain. We just led their Series A, and what they do is automate security best practices into software at the design phase, at the initial innovation phase, before code starts to get developed. And if you do it from there, just the cost advantages, are just so huge, and so yeah, we push on this a lot, and again, we are asking more questions now about privacy controls than we are, about NIST and Mitre controls, but that's just a function, again, of, you've got to have it in place, or else, you're not going to be a part of the conversation.
Excellent. Greg, anything to add? What are you seeing in Mitre attack in the world of SaaS and DevOps?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's been well said already, but I do think it depends on, when we say cloud, if you're talking about infrastructure or software. As Sid mentioned, a lot of the companies we see now are cloud native, so they're born in the cloud. They may develop a very small number of apps that they own, but they leverage third parties. So if you're using a bunch of vendors for business critical applications and customer data, they're forced with not only thinking about the framework, which I would argue isn't so much an actual framework as it is a mindset of how to think about what to secure. In the SaaS world, you've got vendors that have their own controls, and they're not consistent across vendors. So they've got to figure out how to use every vendor's controls to do the basics. And I think Chris has said jacks are better, which is a great analogy. Good hygiene still wins the day, in my opinion. And we're stuck looking at companies that are doing that top 5% of really cool, sexy stuff, whereas most companies still need just to be putting in multi-factor and password rotation and the basics. As we know, the adversary, the economics favor them. And if you can flip that script a little bit, they'll move on. So long way of saying, I think Mitre and NIST are great frameworks, but if it teaches you how to think through where is someone going to go and what can I do to protect or make that a little bit more difficult, I think that's you've won, or you've moved the ball, I should say. You haven't won yet. We're not going to win this game.
Yeah, well said. Chris, next question is to you. So more down these lines, I almost feel like there's an overemphasis on coding security, so like the DevOps stuff, right? CI/CD, and not enough on SaaS, Salesforce, Workday. I mean, is my Dropbox Enterprise configured correctly? That kind of thing. Are you seeing opportunities specifically in the SaaS security market to help people be more secure?
Yes, we've not gone deep into that space yet, and part of the reason is actually something that Greg just mentioned. It's such a mix mash of just different controls, different configurations, not built by us. And so something that specifically addresses software as a service. We've seen companies, we've not invested, but I imagine investment is coming. I think that there's going to be a lot of normalization across not only these providers but these operators of the applications themselves.
Greg, anything you're seeing out there? I mean, I think every one of these SaaS applications has the AWS equivalent of an S3 bucket kind of hanging out there. They all can be misconfigured. Are you seeing tools to discover them and prevent these kind of things?
Yeah, 100%. And we're looking at a bunch. The only bet we've made so far, you could argue, is SaaS. We have a company called Onapsis that secures ERP systems. And what I've learned, and we've been in that company about 6 years, we have yet to go into a Fortune 500 demo Onapsis and not from their lobby without creds to get on their network, be able to shut down their SAP instance. And when you go into a Coca-Cola, a Harley Davidson, an Apple, and show them that you can turn off their manufacturing line or turn off their financials, they freak. And what it taught me is that we used to always think about vulnerabilities, and you'll know this, Ron, from your world, as being issues with how the code was written. Buy an exploit for Word or Excel or write one a 0-day. But misconfigurations are the easy way in, and I would argue you cannot patch people, and people are the vulnerable piece of every organization. So now that everyone's relying on these third parties, I think misconfigurations are where we need to fix security holes, not op code and other types of code that's being written under the surface. Any adversary that's going to go after code vulnerabilities has money, has resources, and you're not going to stop them if they really want what you have. But there are a lot of really basic folks in organized crime rings that go after the misconfigurations, and it's really low-hanging fruit. So we're looking at a bunch that are doing SaaS, and to Chris's point, there's such a long tail, it's hard to find like an Obsidian or an App Omni. They can cover the top 80%, but then you have companies that have a bunch of others, and adversaries just go after the stuff they're not covering. So it's a tricky one, but I think it's a really fascinating space.
That's my favorite quote so far. You can't patch people. So Greg Drake and 1235 ESD, you can't patch people. 406. Awesome. Sid, what are you guys seeing when it comes to SaaS, specifically, the applications we're buying versus building security solutions there?
Yeah. So, I do want to kind of end on Greg's point in part, and I'll answer also your question, Ron. I would say that, on SaaS security, this is one of those topics where, going back to your very early question, Ron, around like, hey, are there areas where you kind of sit in a meeting and you say, this is a new area that you haven't thought about? Brendan O'Connor and App Omni was a great example of that. I still remember Brendan coming in to pitch when he had just started the company at the seed stage, and telling me that, hey, I was the CISO of Salesforce, and we had a number of instances for our customers, and I can tell you that they were giving access where access should not be given. And that is a fantastic example of, that caught me unaware. I kind of sat there and said, well, isn't that Salesforce's job? And he said, no, it's not. There's a shared responsibility model, just like, in cloud service providers. And, that is up to the customer to figure out, how best they should be managing these policies. And the complexity is that Salesforce as a company and the application has become so complex today that most people don't know how to provision access. And that's absolutely true within Salesforce, within Workday, within ServiceNow, and absolutely in each of these big SaaS application companies. The amount of PII information that they hold is equivalent to that you might hold in your on-prem infrastructure. So obviously CISO should be thinking about this, and this is a great example. It's definitely a space, like with Greg and with Chris, that I've spent a ton of time in. I don't have a specific investment in it. Today, a lot of it has just been, with venture investing, it's always tough to get in at the right price, at the right opportunity level, when you think the opportunity is there for you. But it's definitely an area that I've been thinking pretty heavily about. I've probably seen about a dozen companies, particularly in the last 3 years, that have kind of gone and tackled this in different functions, whether that be going after traditional SaaS apps that we might think of, like Salesforce or Workday, or even file sharing apps like Dropbox and Box. But it is very much an opportunity.
Excellent, excellent. So Greg, next question's for you. And just a reminder for folks that we need some questions if there wants to be audience participation. Otherwise, I'm just going to win, best question moderator of the year award here or something like that. So, so Chris, you mentioned that General Minahan said this is an offense and defensive type sport. I definitely agree with that. We've all heard of quotes that, the more you sweat in peace, the less you sweat in wartime. And then, and Mitre, when he was CTO of CrowdStrike, he kind of coined this concept of you need to detect everything in a minute, prove it in 10 minutes, and then get rid of it in 60 seconds. So Greg, question to everybody, first to you though, how much continuous testing, continuous validation, continuous malware generation should we be doing?
I don't think you can do enough these days. I mean, to me, security, what I love about it and why I've been in it for so long, and I argue with my partners about this, to me, it's the only market that really has three hands. Most markets have vendors and buyers, and the vendors fight over the best solution, and the buyers decide which one fits their needs. We've got adversaries that constantly shift the ground beneath our feet, and they're better resourced, they're better funded, they're innovating as fast as the vendors. So to me, to stop continually testing and looking at how those vectors are going to change, you're going to be a sitting duck at some point, because it makes it tricky as an investor, because you want to invest in something that's going to become very big over a decade and sell for billions. When you know that the attack vector may shift in a few years, you have to make sure you pick those that are going to be big enough and sustainable and not just flashes in the pan. But I think you need to be continually testing and pushing your assumptions about where people are coming through the door or through the window or through the chimney, because adversaries are super smart and they will follow the money and they're going to get you one way or the other. So plug the easy holes. So you can't do enough.
Sid, same question. Continuous testing, is it how much valuable is it? Does it impact too much?
I think it's valuable as long as it doesn't impact performance and it doesn't take away from innovation. The problem with continuous testing is there is a good amount of time that's taken, whether that be internally within your security team or that be from other vendors and budget. And you can sometimes end up spending too much money, and to kind of counter Greg in some ways, I do think that you have to kind of find the right balance. The advantage of continuous testing is that you are hopefully finding new gaping holes, and those gaping holes are providing you with new areas that you should be thinking about from an attack vector perspective. So it's this fine balance that you're trying to manage, and hopefully Greg and my conversations is kind of showing that issue that most CISOs are facing around how do I make how do I figure out a way to continuously test my attack vectors, but also not focus on this constant array of testing rather than actually getting things done. I'd say the other thing, kind of in part connected to Greg's comments, the awesome thing about this industry is that the innovation doesn't seem to stop. And we're obviously all in the technology market broadly. The technology market is innovating constantly. But I think there are very few other sectors in technology where you have this relationship with these adversaries, where they're trying to one-up you on every single game. It's almost in some ways like you're playing in the financial markets. You're going against smarter and smarter people, and they're constantly trying to find a way to go and one-up them. And because of that, the innovation just doesn't seem to stop. I mean, there's a reason why within enterprise software as a whole, cybersecurity has the largest number of public companies. 26 companies are public today in cybersecurity. That's the largest category within enterprise software. I mean, it's because this market is growing and it's vast, and there's constantly new innovation. So there's an opportunity to go after different parts of this market.
Well said, well said. So Chris, you kind of see it with both sides, with some investments in companies like Expel, which is kind of doing this in real time. How much are you seeing continuous testing either help their, sharpen the knife and be good, or just general across the board for enterprise customers?
Yeah, with continuous testing, I agree that there needs to be more of it. And I think, through the Expels of the world, what we're hearing is customers don't just want continuous, they want it to be automated too. A set it and forget it type of a mindset, where, you're going to have an automated set of threat feeds, whether it's, proprietary to you or to the tool or to the vendor, and that you can just set it up to continuously poke at your enterprise. And one would hope that you can just do so on your production networks without disrupting things, but that therein lies, another problem that these companies need to tackle. We also look at the continuous testing side, from the side of the aisle of again, the attacker. And so we've invested in a company called Calypso AI. And what they did is they developed a set of adversarial machine learning and AI algorithms to be able to attack AI and better understand the why that comes out of it. And so, what we do is we found that, U.S. government is spending $5 billion a year on AI, $250 billion for global AI adoption over the next 5 years. It's huge money, but do they really know what's under the hood? And so you've got to attack it. You've got to unwind it. Because if, let's just say you've got, a tool for machine vision, and, it sees, a dog, and it says, okay, it's a dog every single time except for that one time. It says it's a cat. Why? How? You've got to pull these things apart, and you've got to continuously attack them. But again, where a lot of these customers are going, and I think it feeds right into what Sid said, is, this is a resource drain. It takes people, it takes expertise, it takes advanced tools. Can we just automate the red teaming? Can't we just automate that?
So you said AI. If this was a drinking game, that would definitely be on the buzzword list, but well said. Definitely agree with that. So Sid, this question is going to go to you as we start off again. So red team, blue team, purple team, automated AI testing. We're talking large enterprise. We're talking large enterprise. I like to talk about good cybersecurity as having some sense of compliance and some sense of hunting, hygiene and hunting. So the question is any of this technology, are there any businesses that are going to bring this outside of enterprise? Are we going to ever bring this to the SMB, small enterprise, even personal people? What are your thoughts on that as an investor?
Yeah, the hope is that we will. And Chris is an investor in Expel. I think that was Dave Merkel's goals when he started Expel. His goal was very much to go after the SMB. He felt that, hey, at Mandiant, we service the best and biggest customers, and I want to go and help the SMB and mid markets who just don't have that capability. And I can go and bring out the talent from Mandiant as well as from my network and go and help these people. Obviously, it's just to this day not worked out as clearly yet, but I do believe that is his goal, his ultimate goal. I think Expel 5 years from now will go after that early end of the market, and there are competitors that will do the same. The issue has been finding a cost-effective way to provide security to those earlier stage companies. They just can't pay the millions of dollars that Mandiant would require. And how do we kind of push that bar down so that they can actually go and afford reasonable security services. To some extent, the MSSPs, the existing traditional players, have tried to do this. They obviously don't provide the same level of value that an Expel can provide. So part of this is, how do we go and automate certain functions of analysts within Expel, and by doing so, reduce the cost of Expel's platform. There are obviously other examples of that will allow this to happen. We have a company called Respond. Respond software really focuses on automating the tier 1 SOC analyst function. The whole concept around this is, hey, if you have a set of alerts that are relatively simple, that are anyways getting outsourced to an MSSP, and you're paying them hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, why don't you just go and automate that function? And obviously the difference here is that it's very hard to automate tier 2 and tier 3 security alerts, which are obviously a lot more complex to solve and do require some level of human intervention. But there are a set of alerts that we can automate. I think automation is going to be the way that we go more and more into the SMB and mid-market customer base. How do we go and figure out, managing our relatively limited source of security talent, and focusing that talent around the toughest attacks?
Chris, same question. Are we ever going to bring red team, blue team concepts to the SMB, perhaps with more or less commentary on Expel?
So yeah, I mean, we need to bring this type of stuff to the SMB space in a huge way. And when we talk about SMB, it's sometimes it's like, oh, it's this mom and pop shop on the corner, it's a laundromat. No, it's thousands of people, billions of dollars of market value, and it still would be far too much for them to go out and hire for $500,000 or $1 million a year security expert to come in and do this themselves. And so I think Sid's right. I think, Dave Merkel's 5-year goal is to bring it into the SMB space even further. And in 7 years, the hope is those people that look through that double pane or that dual glass, and see how Expel is solving for some of those problems, they're learning. And so I think his long-term goal is that they could do these advanced things with a very low-cost person on their own. And so, I do think that there needs to be more that's brought out there. I mentioned Scythe earlier, that is, can be a very easy to use and a very advanced tool to fit into, various different frameworks. Randori, Greg, you mentioned it. I think that there's a lot of a wave of companies that are going to be coming to the forefront here that are going to just want to attack the SMB space. I mean, we just got to. It's the most critical part of our supply chain.
Literally attack, right?
Yes.
Good. So Greg, same thing. Are you looking at investments in SME that would be more red team or very, very much pure blue team, purple team stuff?
Yes, but with a caveat. So again, I agree with Sid and Chris. The challenge, I think, is can we build tech so the cost point, the price point is low enough? And I do think with automation, it is a matter of time before we get there. And I don't know if you guys know the company Expanse. They were just bought for $800 million. They index pretty much the entire web. For them to sell to an SMB would be easy. They already have the data, but they don't want to cannibalize their business. So part of it is a business model problem. So I think the tech is there, it's capable. The business model problem, in addition to not cannibalizing your enterprise business, which is where we know a lot of the money is in cyber because of sophistication, I think you've got an LTV to CAC problem. Because very few cyber companies, in my opinion, have figured out that selling and marketing is as effective as building great tech in cyber as it is in any other industry. It used to be the best tech would win because the buyer was super technical. We're seeing companies, and I won't name them all, that I would argue have inferior tech that have become juggernauts because they are sales and marketing machines. And I think I'm a fan of trying to inject non-cyber DNA into our companies because I think we need to figure out how to market and sell better, especially as you go down SME and SMB. And if you can figure out the LTV to CAC ratio at that level, and you have technology that can scale, that's not, $800K to support one customer, I think you've got a winner. And I know, Ron, you're like someone like a Huntress. They figured out that formula early on how to sell to small companies through channel, but I think they're going to benefit from that. There will be more. in my opinion. But it's a business. It's more of a business model problem to me than a tech problem.
I'll buy you dinner. I wasn't going to mention the direct stuff we've been working on.
No.
All right, we're coming up to the top of the hour, so I got a couple more questions. But I want each of you to think of a question you want to ask the panel while we're going through this last question here, which will be the second to last question if you follow my logic. So anyway, the industry kind of comes in waves, and we've all been in this industry long enough to see it disrupted. I mean, Nierzuk, I can remember him pitching me Palo Alto when he first started. I was thinking, there's no way we need like yet another firewall company. Of course, Palo is much more than a firewall company now. You know, CrowdStrike and SentinelOne, you know, they're much more than antivirus, but they completely upended the antivirus market. So, starting, I think, with Chris, what sort of verticals? You can answer this either way you want. What do you think should be disrupted, and what do you want to see disrupted?
What I think should be disrupted, what I want to see disrupted.
Either one, or both.
Identity and access management. You know, that space. I mean, we've been investors in it, and it is such a pain in the ass. But if you crack that nut, if you really get it right, and you get something that is, you know, identity-based data access, you know, or stuff that focuses in and around that. I mean, that's in my mind, you know, if you can solve the identity problem, you solve like 80% of the problems that are out there, you know, and then it gets down to, you know, what you do about data and then your information infrastructure. And so I would love to see, you know, a lot is happening in identity and access management, but I think a lot more needs to happen in that space.
Greg, what are your thoughts?
I think that's a good one. I'll take a slightly different approach and talk about a vertical I think that is ripe, and that's healthcare. Healthcare is a really tricky one to me because they're way behind on the cyber scale. So they need to do things that most of our companies they're too advanced. And it's been hard to find, similar to SMB, how do you sell to a less sophisticated buyer that is a giant target for the adversary in a way that's cost effective? So to me, that's the one that I think is next to fall vertically. No pun intended.
That's pretty funny. Sid, what are your thoughts on things that can be disrupted?
I'll try to add on and take a different way of thinking about things. Now, I look at the opportunity from an attack vector perspective in three big buckets. There's a software-based attack vector, which is what most of us spend the vast majority of our time around. There's a hardware-based attack vector. Then I call this last bucket human, you know, security, which includes, by the way, identity access management, which Chris just described. I think the last two, hardware and human, have been significantly less focused on. You know, there's not a single public cybersecurity company in the hardware-based attack vector today. Out of those 26, not a single one. The human attack vector, there's only two, Proofpoint and Mimecast. I mean, it's amazing to me that we have not seen large companies in either of these two categories. And it's definitely an area that I think about pretty actively from a new invention perspective.
Well said. And I apologize. I insinuated we were coming up on the end of our time. We actually have another 15 minutes to go. So so drink a Red Bull, take a testosterone pill. We're going to have some fortitude here. It's good. So did each of you guys think of a question you want to ask the panelists? I'm not saying.
Yeah.
All right. So Chris, let's start with you. I've got a few more questions. But let's start with you, Chris. What's your question?
Would anyone on this panel invest? And the answer for us is yes. Invest in a company that's purely focused on offense.
Sid, what do you think?
We've debated it for a long time. It's still a debate. I would say we are hesitant to really, you know, go and look at this. I've only, you know, in the last 6 years, I've only seen two companies which have been purely based on offense that have come in and presented to me, and in both cases, it has been a heavy debate at both at Foundation and at my prior firm. So it's definitely a topic that I worry about in some ways, just given everything going on with nation states. But it's also one that we think about, you know, from a LP perspective. How do our LPs view this? You know, if we are going and investing in an offensive security company, And this is where purple teams and companies that focus on purple teams come in. And Scythe is a great example. Chris has already mentioned. In the case of Bryson, in no way is Scythe an offensive security company, but it is using some of the knowledge to be able to provide better tactics on the defensive side. Those ones we're very comfortable in doing. But if you're looking at a purely offensive security company, it's definitely one that I have had reservations about, and we think about twice before actively going and making an investment. And it's absolutely the reason why we would not make an investment when it came out.
And Sid, before we get to Greg's view on this, if I may, is it because are you concerned that the buyers might be more like the Northrop Grumman's, Lockheed Martin's of the world, which is not necessarily the world that you live in of like SentinelOne and Cisco and Palo, or is it more of an ethical reason?
I think it's a great question. It's less so the former reason, more so the latter reason. And it's not so much, in some ways it's ethical, in some ways it's thinking about our limited partners and what would they like us to invest in. The same way that we don't invest, for example, in marijuana companies. This is an area that we think pretty actively about. And clearly the last 2 years have shown how much of a heightened focus there is around nation state attacks and how people feel about those. So we've always wondered, we've always debated whether our the endowments and the pension funds that give us money would be happy about us going and making an investment that helps the United States go and attack adversaries.
Let me write that down. Marijuana gives enhanced focus on nation state. Got it. Great. Thank you for sharing that. So Greg, what are your thoughts investing in purely offensive? And I guess when I mean offensive, we literally mean like nation state tools, that kind of development.
So you just said one word that I was going to ask for clarification: tools. I would argue Scythe.
Teams, tools, solutions, yeah.
So the answer to me is yes, but it depends. If it's a services business that is just going to attack on behalf of someone, then I'd say probably not. If it is a tools provider that is arming people to attack themselves or to attack others, but they're pulling the trigger, I think it would be a possibility. So I think folks like Scythe, Randori, and others do provide that. And there was a company I looked at that I found really interesting that you could argue is offensive, and it was a debate in my shop, but they basically attached payloads to data that was being stolen from your premise. So if an adversary came and stole something, that had an attachment to it, and as soon as it left the geofence, it caused damage. But they're not attacking anyone. It's like you steal a wad of bills that has an ink pack on it. To me, that's offensive, but I love it. So I would love to look at offensive with you, Chris, if it's tools and tech that you're not necessarily controlling. Yes.
And this is where definitions come in, because Greg, the example you just described, I would bucket into purple team and something that you'd be very comfortable doing. I'd be more worried if there was purely a payload that was an attacking payload without any of this defensive nature that you just described.
Right.
Yeah, I come from the Dan Gear school of thought on this, that all cyber tech is dual use. I mean, we saw Blue Coat, being sold in the Middle East, perhaps for, suppressing, citizen views of the internet and stuff like that. And I'm sure that was not the intent of when they founded that company. And I just think that definitely goes there. Having worked in the military, worked in the intelligence community, there's a lot of great tech built internal, but F-16s are built by vendors, and I think your next great round of cyber reconnaissance and offensive tools will be built by vendors. So that's fun. Greg or Sid, do you have a question that you want to ask the other panelists?
I'm happy to go, Greg, if you'd like, to give you
Sure.
a little bit more time.
Go for it.
So, this is by the way, this is an ongoing question. I've had conversations with Ron and Greg on this topic in particular in side conversations, but how do all of you guys think about this relationship between developer and security and IT professional? I mean, this is a contentious relationship. It is constantly changing, and clearly this movement to the cloud and agile development that is being created by this movement is causing additional contention around who manages what and who is responsible for what. And do you think that we will ever meet some type of balance where both parties are comfortable with the strategy that we've come up with.
Chris or Greg? Chris?
Yeah, so I'll just use a budgetary example. JP Morgan spends $700 million on cybersecurity. They also spend $2 to $2.5 billion on the 25,000 software developers they have in-house. And so I think at the end of the day, the IT side generally wins, especially for those types of profit-conscious companies. But when it comes to governments, they're less concerned about profits, more concerned about that security control that's been built in from the ground up.
Greg?
Yeah, so Sid, I think it's a great question, and I believe yes, eventually developers will be aware and be responsible for the basics. I think we're right now at a point where we see tools that are helping them actually write really secure code. I don't know if that's going to fly, but I think just being security aware is going to permeate the entire organization, from office managers to custodians to developers to CEO. And I boil things down to simple terms because my head is really basic. But I think about cyber as very much like our houses. We all have locks on the doors. We have basic hygiene. We close the windows at night. We don't have one person responsible to do that every night. Everyone that comes in the house, everyone in your family knows to do the basics. Yet there's usually one person in the house that really thinks about the router and how do I protect data? And if we have things, gems, do we put them in a safe? I think businesses have to become the same way. They have to have the locks closed, that's multi-factor authentication. They have to have strong passwords. Basics, I think, need to permeate, and that's where you can't patch people, but I think you can lift the bar up pretty easily. So I think developers fall into that, and I do think they're going to have to be part of the solution. And can I ask a follow-on question, Ron, to the rest of the group?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I'd like your thoughts on this too, Ron. I'd like to hear, do you think the trend of crowdsourced security, you've got Sneak, you've got HackerOne, Bug Bounty, do you think that is a long-term trend?
Yes, and what we've seen is the crowds that they service tend to use any and all platforms in which they are able to make money. And so Synac and Bug Crowd, a lot of the same crowd. We're starting to see new forums, new places where, they're going outside of sort of the defensive training and more, this is how you attack. So we're seeing more and more of that come. But I mean, our thesis, is heavily focused on the people. And I'm going to use, Greg, your phrase. You can't patch people. And for so much of what we see, I think that's got to be front of mind going forward. If you have access to a keyboard and the internet and you're working inside of an organization, inside of their four walls, you are a vulnerability. Doesn't matter if you're an executive assistant or the CEO, you're part of that vulnerability scape, and so yeah.
So I think we're going to have that because we don't know how to make a perfectly secure, website, a web app, mobile app, whatever you want to call it. We can all recognize reduced risk. A container is more secure than building on an OS because I just got rid of the OS, but it doesn't remove the fundamental logic flaws in my apps or remove the admins who are running this thing as a potential target, for phishing or malicious insiders. So there's no real good way to kind of say that we're done. And a great way to find stuff that you missed is to keep changing up the technology that you're using. Bug bounty programs are a great way to do that. So is switching up your source code audit, right? If you're a Veracode person, it might not be a bad thing to go work with somebody else for a little bit with a different stack, just because they might find something that you've missed that could be really embarrassing. Any other comments on that, Sid? Right.
I don't think I have a lot more to say. I think a lot was said. I'd say that crowdsourced security generally is here to stay, and in particular, I'd kind of re-highlight Chris's point and say that everybody is responsible for securing an organization, and we will. Well, the advantage of the HackerOnes was that it actually allowed a number of people who didn't think about cybersecurity as an area to get excited about it. I mean, there's so many examples of kids who went and found flaws and bugs and were able to report it and made a good amount of money through one of these platforms. And my hunch is if we looked at those individuals, a number of them decided to go into our sector, into cybersecurity, and go and do something in the sector. If that's the way that we're going to see more people come into the sector, then I'm all for it. I do think that we want to kind of have, heightened focus around this crowdsourced security angle. I mean, we have, in just 2019 alone, there were 1.5 million unfilled jobs in cybersecurity. I mean, like, we have to go and figure out a way to get more people into our industry. And if this is one way to do it, then I'm all for it.
So you guys look like you're all in your home offices. Do you have access to pen and paper where you're at?
Yes.
No. Yes. Chris? Sid? All right.
Not pen and paper. I have my computer, but let me try to find a pen.
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to write down one word that you think is overhyped in the industry, and then we're going to all raise it up to the monitor at the same time. So just one word. One word. It could be an acronym. It could be a whatever. And then when you're ready, hold it up, but don't show it. So we're all going to do the reveal at the same time. Just one word that's overhyped. And then of course we're going to follow up and we're going to talk about why you think it's overhyped. If I was more prepared, I could be playing the Jeopardy music. Alex Trebek, God rest his soul. Sid looks like he's thinking.
I am thinking. I'm trying to think, like, what is the one biggest word?
Or anyone's good. Anyone's good. This is what's called filling time because we have about 5 more minutes to go. But this might be highly entertaining, and I definitely appreciate you guys participating. Sid, looks like you don't have a winner yet.
I do. No. I've got something. We're ready.
All right, you guys ready to lift it up? All right, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Who's got a camera we can read? Cyber, AI, and AI. All right, so let's let Chris, what was the first? Oh, the AI. Yeah, I thought it was other words. So Chris, cyber. Cyber is overhyped, overdone. Why do you say that?
What does cyber even mean?
It means it's one of the aliens that Doctor Who has to fight.
No, absolutely. When I just think, it goes back to some of the early comments that we had. It is such a great area for so many individuals that it takes, crowdsourced, security. It takes, these types of massive nation state attacks to get focus on this area. And even with people that have focus, like, we've all been doing this now for some time and long enough where, we're still pulling our hairs out because we can't figure out, difference between A and Z. And so, cyber, yes, we have to defend cyberspace, but I think we need to, think more about, what cyber represents, which ultimately is information. We depend upon cyber and cyberspace as a function to deliver information. And if we can't trust that cyberspace is going to do that, then we can't trust the information that gets delivered. And so I think, we need to open up the lexicon just beyond cyber, keep on it, because that's, now the word that the world has grasped onto, but we've got to open up, I think, the lexicon a little bit more here.
And Chris, I got to see you participate in some of the cyber moonshot breakouts, and I think you said very similar things to some of the more learned people in our industry, which I think is kind of interesting. It's definitely a big problem if we can't define what we're doing. All right, so Sid and Greg, you guys get you get to both talk about why AI is overhyped. Greg, perhaps you, why do you think AI is being overhyped?
First of all, my opinion, AI in our industry stands for adversary innovation, not artificial intelligence.
Good.
Right. And the artificial intelligence side, I think every company thinks they're using AI when they're probably just have decision trees, maybe machine learning. Very few are actually using true artificial intelligence. That's super highly sophisticated, and I think it's hard to implement in a very cost-effective way for cyber.
Got it. Sid, how do you feel about this?
Greg couldn't have said it better. I think that is exactly it, which is just that. I mean, the number of companies that I'm sure the three of you agree with this, that we sit in a pitch deck and they have to mention AI in some way, even if they don't need it, even if they don't need it in the deck, It's just shocking to me. It is shocking. It's not like there's a higher chance that any of us will invest in the company because they use that term. So I wish that people in the industry recognize this, and I wish that we had less billboards kind of highlighting AI this, AI that within your platform, particularly amongst the larger security vendors. And I worry, by the way, that the second kind of overhyped word, if we're to do this panel again in 3 years, will be cloud. Everyone's going to start to use cloud in some way. And that's obviously not the whole point of this. These are fundamental shifts. AI, the fundamental shift is around how do we use compute resources more to reduce the amount of services usage. And cloud is a fundamental shift around infrastructure. And effectively, at some point, all these companies are going to be broadly in these two subsegments of the market. The level of AI that they use is irrelevant, at least from a pitch deck perspective. It's something that we all dig into from a product perspective.
Well said. Well, at this point, you guys all get gold medals for having not only very relevant answers, but very pertinent answers. Let's go around the horn and just talk about how people can get in touch with you, what your process is for getting feedback from maybe the CISO community or the cyber community. And feel free to drop emails, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever you want to do. Let's start with Greg.
Sure. So one way that we try to stay in touch with the community is that we have what I call a cyber executive council. So we have 40 to 60 CISOs, depending on the time, that range from retail to financial services to technology, that look at deals with us, that occasionally I'll solicit for what are the problems that you're not finding solutions for to help us know where to hunt. So that's one way we stay kind of abreast of where the trends are moving. And then also when we dig into companies, we introduce them to CISOs that are big buyers, influencers, thought leaders in the industry. So it helps to add value to some of the companies we're looking at, usually even before we invest. So that's one way we plug into the CISO community. And I am happy to chat with anyone. I'm Greg at 406ventures.com. So anyone is welcome to reach out to me. Our emails and phone numbers are right on our website, but open to meeting any folks in the industry that want to chat, especially smart entrepreneurs that are building interesting things to help us solve these problems.
Excellent. Sid, how about you? How do you stay in touch with the folks out there and how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so on how to get a hold of me, there's multiple different ways. You can email me, it's strivedi@foundationcap.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, send me a message. I guarantee that I'll respond as long as it's not a bot. You can reach out to me on Twitter, that's another way too. LinkedIn is an easy way. I use LinkedIn probably the most frequently, and email is obviously best. But if you prefer to use LinkedIn, that's an easy way too. On the other question, Ron, that you had around how do we kind of use our customer networks, for me personally, this was more of a hunch. I started kind of building out a customer network a decade ago. And the whole idea I thought was, hey, well, what's going to be one way that you differentiate as an investor in this market? And I felt that there was going to be this plethora of newer and newer companies in cybersecurity and IT that were going to be created. I said, okay, if that's the case, then you probably need some advantage, and understanding who are the buyers is probably going to be a good way of doing this. And so today that network is about 150 CISOs, CTOs, and CIOs, and I've principally focused it on Fortune 2000 customers. Part of the reason for that is out here in the Bay Area, most people have lots of access into the unicorns and decacorns. And obviously they're a certain type of customer, but as we've all described in earlier parts of this panel, the large enterprises is where you end up getting the most amount of budget. So if you have that access, that ends up being very, very critical at the early stage. And similar to Greg, and my guess is also Chris, we use that network around diligencing potential companies, around helping our existing portfolio find their first, usually 5 to 10 customers. And also, and this is a new area, a lot of these larger companies have started to have people who have left to go and start exciting startups themselves. So I've absolutely seen a couple of CISOs go and do that. I've seen subordinates of those CISOs or CTOs go and do that. And it's a great new way of finding new innovation. So hopefully that answers the question, but please do reach out.
Excellent. Chris, how do people get a hold of you, and how do they, how does Paladin keep up with what's going on in the CISO and cyber community?
Getting a hold of me, LinkedIn. or you just can't get a hold of me? No, I'm pretty accessible. See Steed at paladincapgroup.com, LinkedIn. I would even give my cell phone out, but I recognize the audience, so I don't think that's a valuable exercise. In terms of staying abreast, a lot of our thesis goes back to 2001 and in the months after the attacks on 9/11, and that was that dual use thesis, a homeland security investment thesis focused on bringing best of breed from one side to the other. And so our strategic advisory group is populated with individuals that come out of the government community first, and now have gone into commercials. So like a Vice Admiral Jan Tai, she ran 10th Fleet. She's now on the board of Goldman Sachs. Chris Inglis, Deputy Director of NSA, is now on the board of FedEx. It's those types of individuals that help give us that dual use mindset, because some of the most critical problems in cyber tend to, at times, from a nation state perspective, happen against governments. Then it filters down once the cost of developing those attack tools, it goes over to that commercial side of the aisle. And so, fish meat, for instance, that was an Army concept, turn every human, every soldier into a sensor. It's stuff like that we utilize to try to find market opportunities. And so whether it's introducing somebody into Goldman at the very earliest stages, or just simply trying to keep abreast of trends inside of cyber commands, those are the types of things that we try to push forward, just to make sure that our companies understand the taxonomy around them, which is this big gray, or should I say purple world.
Phenomenal. For anybody who wants to get a hold of me, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm RONGULA, Ron Gula, and our website's gula.tech. We have a lot of information there about how to contact us. I want to thank Sid, Greg, and Chris for going the distance, an hour and 15 minutes of talking about venture capital investing. But these guys are all pros, and they have a lot to share. So for those watching, we're going to be going into a break right now. And then this afternoon on the executive track, we have a fireside chat with Joel Scharlat and Charles Blauner. We've got a presentation on the immediate value of purple teams from Ryan Lerbeck. I apologize if I got your name wrong. And then we've got Sunil Yu is going to be presenting. Bryson, I'm doing your job. How's it going?
Yeah, I wasn't expecting to go into that, so that's why I decided. I was sitting there waiting to jump in, and then you started doing it, and I'm like, oh, I'll just let him know I'm here.
That's right. That's right. And then, of course, Sunil Yu closing out this afternoon. And then I guess you're going to be making closing remarks, right, Bryson?
Yep, I'll be delivering closing remarks. Greg, I think you got the quote of the panel, which was, "You can't patch humans."
Can't people.
You can't patch
people.
That's right.
Thank you. I'll take a little.
Yeah, I got the quote correctly when I put it on Twitter.
Awesome.
Do I get a unicorn?
What's that?
Unicorn? Do I get a unicorn point for that?
Greg, I will send you all of the unicorn swag you want. It has to make it on your laptop.
And Bryson isn't joking.
Hey,
Bryson is not joking.
Is it?
Yes, Sid, where's your unicorn swag?
Oh, it's all over our office, Bryson. Man, I think every single kid now has access to your coloring book. Every single kid.
Yeah, we're working on making the coloring book more accessible, because of course you can't do anything physically anymore. And I'm really curious if Eliza May is on here, because before we were doing some pre-show banter, and I think Eliza May, who's based out of England and runs a small consulting company there, really captured, I think, the general technical perspective on this, which is, what do VCs really bring to the table? And so now that she's had the opportunity to hear what I thought was a really interesting perspective, because again, innovation primarily is coming from market dynamics, and you are funding those ideas because money is the lifeblood of an idea. Not passion doesn't put food on the table and let you bring that to market. And certainly, as somebody who started 2 different companies, I have learned a lot about channels and business models and all the different things that we want to do it. In fact, Charles, who also is both a former CISO and now in the VC world, may have some thoughts too. If you want to bleed into like the panel before you, Charles, you're welcome to.
Well, you're muted, Charles. Muted.
We need to invest in audio. Seriously, that is a technology on this that there should be like some better way to do this.
Yes, no, I figured it out. And part of the challenge is, quite honestly, in any given day, you're now using 4 or 5 different ways to actually interact with people. The physical world may have been more time consuming, but at least there was one standard way of doing it. You went somewhere and you talked to someone. Now between Zoom and what are we doing now? Go to webinar, figuring it all out. If you want to think about like your question with respect to sort of the VC space, I mean, the reality is, as the companies start looking for funding, there's a class of VCs where the primary value you get from them is money, and that is a completely useful value to get from a VC. And there are other VCs where the primary value you get from them is actually strategic advice. And that's also a completely valid and useful thing to expect from a VC. Those VCs, there are a very small percentage of VCs that are good at both, but you don't have to be good at both to be useful in the ecosystem, right? There are a lot of VCs that have no practical experience in anything other than giving out money. And there are a lot of startups that need money, so that's good. All right. And then
None of
there
them
are a
are
handful of VCs. Well, and I jumped in late, so I don't even, I'm not commenting on any one entity at all. And then there are a lot of VCs where the principals are practitioners, and in those circumstances, the value those VCs can bring is above and beyond just financial.
Eliza May, are you on?
I am, yeah. I thought it was a really valuable panel actually, and I do see the importance of VCs and their part in the overriding ecosystem of the modern economy. Personally, I'm an absolute control freak, and I did not want to give up any control, even if it was 1%. And I could, with the resources that I had and the people that I have, I could do this on my own. I could do this without funding. So that's the route I went down. But if I was developing a platform or something that had not been done before, or working in an incredibly complex space, I'd absolutely have gone down that route. But it just so happened with the services that we run, we're comfortable with them, and we didn't need the connection assistance or the financial. So I'm lucky in that sense, but I think there's a need for it, but it's not something that I needed. And
Gentlemen, I would say that is the mark of a successful panel, that you converted at least one skeptic publicly.
I was being nice.
Yes. I didn't realize we were going to get judged so quickly.
Yeah, all right. We're going to write our scores and then we're going to hold them up.
There you go.
No, it was good. If nothing else, for the hat. I can't make my mind up if it's a purple Stetson or a purple pimp hat. I have no idea.
It's the purple team hat of justice.
I don't know that justice plays into this.
No, it doesn't.
Someone's handing out justice on the purple team usually, right? Red team and blue team.
Ron, Chris, Greg, and Sid, thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to talking to you all again.
Enjoy.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Let's have a great weekend.
Boom. Well, all right, there we go. All right. So Charles, there's Joel. You're welcome to join our pre-show banter. Technically, you go on in 5 minutes officially. So Ty, what did you think?
Wow, like there was so much to learn there. There's so many people that I talk to that pitch me ideas because, you know, we screen folks for the meetup group and they're always wondering what should they talk about, what they shouldn't talk about. I've even gotten pitches for crowdsourcing network defense and how to make that happen. And you know, they touched on. Say that again.
Well, I'm both as a former CISO and as a current investor. I'm not sure crowdsourcing network defense is something I would view as either operationally feasible or financially a good investment.
Right. So, I mean, I'm just throwing the things out there. And, you know, they touched on the identity and access management and how that could all be intertwined with everything. But, you know, overall, like the VCs help control and drive the market. So getting a really good understanding of some of the things that they're looking for currently and in the future,
so
what moves them.
I'm gonna, and I'll apologize for interrupting. I don't actually think VCs control the market.
So they help.
I think VCs are fast followers of trends, and some of them try to guess ahead on trends. But I think VCs are fast followers on trends, and I think it's actually a market that is as dynamic and as organic as I could think of, having been on multiple sides of it. And the reason I say it's organic is because things literally spring from the mind, sometimes of an entrepreneur, or sometimes from the mind of a buyer, right? And as a VC now, what I try to do is observe what I hear people coming up with ideas on the selling side, and observe what I hear people looking for on the buying side, and that's what drives my investments. So I actually think the VCs are much more influenced by the ecosystem than they actually influence the ecosystem. Although the only thing that VCs influence to me is there's too much money out there, so there are too many companies that will die. And so that's sad, but
So depressing, Jesus.
Well, I mean,
You're putting me off my gin.
well, I mean, a good VC, if a good VC is like a good baseball player, right? Like if you get it right 30% of the time at a VC, you're doing well, all right? I mean, that's just the statistics of it. And that's why, as a CISO, like, I mean, there are 500 new companies to talk to every year.
Joel, I think we're doing your job. I feel like we've already wandered into the fireside chat. What did we hire you for? You're on mute. I'm telling you, someone needs to invent this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a simple button, right? Like it's one tiny button, and I have the Mac with the cool little bar across, and it's even red or green. All I gotta do is press it, and I still can't seem to press it. So anyway, I appreciate you doing my job with the fireside chat. But I mean, if we're ready to kick this off, I'm certainly happy to take over, and everyone can enjoy the next 30 minutes. Cool. All right. Well, thanks, Bryson. Thanks, Ty. Good to see you again, by the way.
Sure.
So, hey, welcome, everyone. This is a fireside chat on the executive track of the Purple Team Summit. I do want to mention, kind of prior to getting into any of this, because I tend to forget, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A tab on the GoToWebinar or in the Discord channel. If you're on there, it's in the executive track channel. I will do my best to pivot this way and look at the Discord channel. As Bryce mentioned, my name is Joel Scharlat. I'm the Director of Operations for Cyberbytes Foundation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, just located just south of Washington, D.C. And our mission is really to provide education, innovation, and outreach programs that are responsive to our national security challenges. So I have the privilege today of kind of moderating this fireside chat, and I'm joined today by Charles Blauner, who is a partner in CISO in residence at Team8 Group and president at CyberAegis Consulting. So Charles has over 40 years of experience with a wealth, and I'll use that kind of pun intended, so a wealth of experience in the financial sector, including spending some time on the board of directors of the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center. So welcome, Charles. Glad to have you here, and
Thank you
looking
very
forward to the next 30 minutes of our time here. So we're here to talk about kind of purple teams and their value to businesses. And so, as I mentioned, you've got 40 years of experience. What I didn't mention is what that experience kind of really is. So I wanted you to take some time, provide a little bit more information on your background, and then how has that shaped how you think about cybersecurity?
Sure, thanks. And it's hard to compress so much time into so little space, but I mean, I started my life very technical. And so it gave me some cred later on in my life when talking to the folks in my red team. But I go back to the very early days of information security, early modems, first hackers, but I spent most of my life in banking. In the 90s, I was the CISO at JP Morgan. In 2000s, I was the CISO at Deutsche Bank, and I led the security program at Citi most of the last 13 years. And I think, especially since we're thinking about this from the executive perspective, I think one of the big evolutions really has been that early on, people thought of this as fundamentally a technical topic. And it was the responsibility of the technical folks to worry about it. I think today people have realized that this is a fundamental business issue. And when you think about building a security program nowadays, you really have to sort of base it on that. And I think if you're thinking about a security program in a current company today, if you really think about it, first and foremost, from a business risk perspective, you've got a good start. If you help break it down to the people so they understand the difference between protection, detection, response, and recovery, as a CISO explaining it to your board, that's sort of the next start. And I think the most fundamental thing that you can do as you think about this from a leader perspective, a business perspective, is I think you have to be intelligent about it. The session before, I know some of the folks, I heard some of the conversation at the end talking about the actual intel community. And so I don't necessarily mean everyone needs to have their own version of the CIA, but being intelligence-led just means being a thoughtful learning organization. And so I think my time in has taught me that if you continue to learn, and if you're business oriented, those are sort of the most fundamental necessities for success.
Great. Yeah, no, I think that's some pretty good insight there. I mean, I will say that's almost why I didn't kind of throw your introduction out there, because it is kind of hard to compress those 40 years into in just a couple of minutes. But I think hopefully over the next 25 or so minutes, we'll help kind of pull that out. Since we are here to kind of talk about purple teams, right? And because we're sort of, as you and I talk, kind of keeping this at the very sort of executive high level, maybe we should take the opportunity now to kind of really sort of define what a purple team is, right? So just that we're kind of baselining the conversation. So how would you, as a CISO, former CISO in residence, how do you explain what a purple team is?
So I actually think of the purple team in a way as one of the instantiations of this philosophy about being intelligence-led. All right. If we take a step back for a moment and you think about what intelligence-led means, intelligence-led means understanding your adversaries and how they do their work. It means understanding your own strengths and weaknesses, and it means continuously learning. If you think about that then, and you think about how you think about defending a bank or any other kind of firm, you think about this whole idea of protection, detection, response, and let's put recovery aside for a moment. If you have that as your framework and you have this idea of being intelligence-led, one of the first things you need to understand is how good are my defenses, all right? But you don't want to do that without context. You want to do that from the perspective of who are my adversaries, what are they after, and how are they trying to come after me? And so if you think about those business necessities and you think about the evolution of sort of red team to purple team, it really is about fulfilling those necessities, all right? The whole idea of red team, purple team is really what I would think of more as just like a fusion, okay? It's bringing the intelligence about your adversaries. It's bringing the skills around execution of those adversarial techniques. And it's bringing an understanding of your strengths and weaknesses together and really testing them under live fire, right? Not thinking about this in a laboratory way, but testing them under live fire, which is what the purple team sort of brings it all together. And it's really important to understand why this is so critical from a business perspective, because it's the only way to really look at the combination of technology, process, and humans, all right? It's really easy in a lab to test a product, okay? It's easy for an auditor to look at a process and say, are you executing that process in a consistent fashion? But understanding, is the system working to help defend me from bad guys? Those things don't do. And so if you're going to be intelligence-led about it, it really drives you to thinking about this kind of testing and the underlying philosophies that come in purple teaming, this sort of fusion of teams, this fusion of perspectives.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I like how you bring together. You're talking about the people, the process, the technology, right, and how it's really an ecosystem. What I did want to, as I was looking through the Discord conversation from an earlier panel discussion, somebody had mentioned that purple team is a process and not necessarily a physical team. Whereas I think most people kind of see it as, hey, you've got your red team on the attack and your blue team on the defense side, bringing the two teams together. So what's your take on that? Is it a conglomeration of your attack and defend, or is it really just a process that brings, as you say, the intelligence piece in, and then hands that information over to the defenders?
So I'm going to sort of come down in more along the lines of process, but I'm going to use a slightly different word. I think purple team is more about a culture, all right? And you want to create process to make the culture something sustainable. But I don't think it's about organizational structures, all right? I mean, some people have outsourced SOCs. Some people have internal SOCs. Some people have hybrid SOCs. Some people have intel teams. Some people have providers. Some have both. Some people have, my last company, I mean, George is out there somewhere. I mean, I had a lot of ethical hackers, and I'd put my old team up against any. Some companies have one. Some companies rely purely on outside third parties. So who makes up the purple team is not really important, because it's going to be different in every company. But what can be consistent in every company is an underlying philosophy, an underlying culture of this sort of collaborative view around how you are understanding what your risk posture is. All right, not in a theoretical sense, but in a real practical sense. All right, and so I wasn't part of the earlier discussion, but I would come down on process leaning towards culture.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I like that. And I like the, I actually like how you did reframe it as it's more of a culture, right? So it's getting the organization to understand the value of purple team, right? So if that's the culture, then what's the value of that? So then I would actually throw that question out to you. So aside, I mean, we've talked a little bit about sort of sharing the information and bringing the intelligence into the culture and the process. What is the value of that, right? Like, and maybe focusing specifically on the banking industry, given, kind of your background and your history there, right? Like, so to the banking industry, what's the value of bringing that in to, a company that may not be used to doing that?
Well, I mean, so I think the most important value is self-awareness. All right. It is very easy for a company to have gone out and bought a whole bunch of tools and hired a group of people and to say, okay, I got it, I'm good. That's a false belief, right? You can never sort of be satisfied by that. And so I think the first thing that it sort of brings in is this, it forces a degree of self-awareness, which is an important starting point. But I also think it creates context, all right? Having a conversation, and let's move away from banking for a moment. Having a conversation with the head of a manufacturing company about a certain security issue is not really interesting. Putting it into the context of, okay, let's think of today's world. Any one of the dozens of companies working on therapeutics or vaccines around COVID, and explaining to the CEO that our company's future is based on us guarding this intellectual property, both from a confidentiality perspective and if we want to get FDA approval for our meds perspective, from an integrity perspective. All right. Wouldn't you like to have some sense of knowledge about how the Chinese or the Russians or the French or the next country after next country after next country are likely to come after us? Okay, so we need this like intelligence thing happening. Wouldn't you like to understand how our defenses line up against that and have a sense of, are we able to defend ourselves? All right. Not for a security reason, but because there is this thing we're trying to do. I talked to a company and we were talking about supply chain. And in the security supply chain, we always talk about data. Their cyber supply chain concerns were all about delivering a certain bottle to a certain place at a certain time. to make sure that a product got to a certain store at a certain date to meet a commitment. Whatever the context is, there's a business context, and that is, and understanding the business context and thinking about how you hack yourself, how you test yourself. That's what purple teaming is all about. And when you talk to your board of directors and you talk about the results of a purple team event, because you've thought about it in this holistic way in a business context, the kind of conversation that you're having with your board is really different than if you think about an old-fashioned red team event and you're talking about, well, this server was unpatched and this thing had this thing and this thing had that thing. Yeah, you exposed a bunch of security vulnerabilities. Have you had a meaningful conversation with your board about business risk? No, and I think the philosophy of purple teaming underpins this philosophy of thinking about and talking to your board in a more business-oriented way. And so I think I rambled, but I think I answered your question also.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you did. I mean, and really, I think as you know, I mean, now what I've, you know, because I kind of came in, I mean, and from my perspective, you know, if you talk about DevOps, right, the value of combining two teams there is the development and the operations side. And the value there is that you get the picture from both sides, right? So you understand, you know, hey, I developed this, but, you know, back in the day, right, like you would develop it, but you'd hand it over to the folks that maintained it, right? And they were hardly ever the same. But now if you've created an issue, you're solving that issue, right? So there's a clear kind of value where I've got some of that intrinsic knowledge.
Yeah, and just like everything, there are value trade-offs in all of those decisions.
Absolutely, right. And so I think, you know, as you and I talk, and as I, you know, so I'm sorry, so as I had the thought of, hey, purple team was really bringing the red team with the defenders together, creating a team. As I've gone through the day, it's really, you know, we've seen, you know, purple team is a culture, as you've said, purple team is a process, right? And so then if I'm an executive and my CISO comes in and says, you know, hey, we just did this purple team exercise, so who's on the purple team, right? Like, I mean, maybe it's better to go back and kind of have that conversation and say, okay, if we think it's more of a process and we think it's more of a culture, then who takes part in those purple team exercises?
So I think you have to break that up into a couple of different pieces, all right? And this is my perspective, which does not necessarily mean this is correct, but my perspective is that the part of a quote unquote purple team exercise that's dramatically different from a traditional exercise is the planning process, all right? It's not the actual execution of the test, all right? In the end, whether philosophically you're doing this as a purple team thing or a more traditional thing, in the end, there's an aspect of it where your SOC, without knowing what the hell is happening in a completely unannounced way, is responding to real stuff getting thrown at them, all right, from the red team, okay? And so the in real-time hacking team and the in the real-time defending team, I mean, in the real-time defending team, that's your everyday SOC, that's your blue team, okay? What's really different, what makes it purple to me anyway, is the planning process, is the collaborative nature of the planning, the scoping of it. And it's, again, I don't think it's just red team and blue team. I think it's an intelligence function together with the red team and the blue team that makes up this planning process. And that is, to me anyway, the purple part of it, okay? You may have one observer from the blue team watching the red team, because you may have ground control or control rules to say, okay, at this point you have to stop before real harm is done. But generally speaking, The blue team has to be completely unaware of this happening for it to have any use. And so in the midst of the live fire thing, there has to be a wall there, right? Because if they know you're coming, you're not testing them.
Right.
Right.
And,
All right. So to
yeah,
me,
so
purple is a purple. I like that. Purple is a planning thing.
so then if I mean if we sort of we talked about exercises and sort of leaving the I don't want to probably not the right way to say it, but sort of leaving the blue team in the dark, right? Like making it a little bit more of a surprise, so that you're not gaming the game, if you will, from an exercise perspective. But then tie that back into the culture, right? So I can't leave the blue team in the dark all year, right? Like, so if it's a culture, how do you incorporate the red team and the blue team sort of philosophy together within the company?
Because what ties it together culturally is this whole intelligence-led culture, where one of the three underlying tenets is this continuous learning. All right. For red teaming, the actual events are within a prescribed time frame. A company cannot tolerate continuous purple teaming, right? Purple teaming, the actual event is a time-boxed event. It has to be, because the reality is, if you think about constant purple teaming, that would create a cloud of fog that a bad guy could take advantage of. All right. So the event is still, in a sense, a time box controlled event. The SOC doesn't know when it's going to happen. It's just an incident, but it's not an incident that they're going to be managing for 6 months.
Sure.
All right. It's going to be an incident that gets to a certain point, and now the manager is going to come in and say, okay, game's over. You didn't know it was a game, but game's over. And so what makes it purple is, okay, event happened. Now what's the learning? The learning is a purple thing. All right. Then people go off, do their work, their tuning, and whatever the time frame is, 6 months or a year later, you're doing your next event. And the planning is purple again, and the lessons learned is purple again. The test is blue against red.
Okay, yeah, so we've got about 6 minutes left here. I wanted to, if any questions do come up, I'm happy to take those and pass them along. And we do have, some comments in the Discord channel, primarily around, there's a little bit of disagreement, I think, on how you say, hey, it's testing the environment, but really this particular comment is saying, hey, don't agree. You're not testing the blue team, you're testing the environment and how it really needs to be open and transparent.
You're testing both. I'm going to disagree. You're testing, when you're doing a real event, you're testing your employees in how they deal with phishing or other types of methods you're going to use for your initial attack vector. Okay, you're testing your technology to understand whether things that are meant to be preventative or preventing, things that are meant to be detective or detecting. You're testing your process and you're testing your people. So I disagree. I'm going to respectfully disagree. The event is testing all of it. It's testing the entire end-to-end chain of protect, detect, respond. And that detect, respond is the security operations center, humans and process, right? And so yes, you are testing the whole system, but the blue team is a part of the system. They are part of defining the scope, but during the active test, they are as much a subject of the test as anything else is.
Sure. Okay. I guess we got, like I mentioned, about now left. Maybe one last question for me. I mean, is the purple team as a process or as a culture? I mean, is it for every company? I mean, is this just like a large company thing? Is it a small company thing? Does it apply sort of across the board? Maybe apply more pertinent to others? What's your sort of take on that?
I think some of the underlying philosophical pieces are actually doable for any company. All right. The process by which you implement it will vary a lot, but the idea, the philosophical core of this as a fundamental learning opportunity, that can be true anywhere. The core philosophy of doing this and framing it in a business context can be done anywhere. So I think those philosophical tenets work from large company to small company. The details of what it looks like because of outsource socks, insource socks, all the other things. I mean, small companies are going to be outsourced everything. Large companies are more likely to be insourced most things, right? That's cool. So I think it's those two philosophical tenets that apply broadly. Everything else, scale does matter.
Right. Well, great. So Charles, we're about at our time here. I wanted to thank you. Appreciate you taking the time today to come and talk to us. And I've certainly learned a lot. So I appreciate it. And thank you. I see Bryson is the mage, as I'm going to call you now, the mage with your hat, with your hoodie on over there, and the beard has reappeared. So I think we're about out of time. Turn it back over to Bryson.
Gandalf is slated for December. You're early, Joel.
Whoa, which one? What's that?
Cyber Gandalf kicks off in December.
Oh. Hope I didn't ruin any surprises.
No, I thought this was great. So one of the things I like about having my conversations that I've had with Charles, and I do want to call you out as being, you've been particularly generous with giving feedback to me as a founder in the past, as well as your view on the market and particularly where our platform fit into it. And I think that's something that I would recommend. One, everybody go find other VCs that have that kind of perspective. And of course, I'm sure if you can get in touch with Charles over at Team 8, they're always looking for new ideas as well. But that's how you sharpen the edge to know the quickest way to go and drive into the market. Two, I like that you do have a very particular perspective on this. You were a CISO of one of the largest financial institutions in the world. Your ideas are not philosophical. They were what helped you be successful to accomplish what you needed to do. And purple teaming was a part of the process that you had there at that FI.
The purple teaming back then, it was just part of this larger concept that we were building around this whole idea of fusion. Purple teaming is a piece of that larger philosophical thing, which was get as many different bright minds with as many different perspectives together to look at something. And that's what's so cool about purple teaming. And that's why I think it's less about specific teams, because every situation, the bright minds may be different bright minds. The right people in a certain purple team event may actually come from the app dev team or an infrastructure group, not necessarily from your traditional red team or blue team.
Turns out it's all a part of a common surface area for your enterprise.
Every human being is part of the surface area of the enterprise.
I agree.
I heard someone mention before patching people. We haven't figured out how to do that, but As a VC, if anyone has an idea about how to patch people, I would love to hear it. And if I believe it, I will get you money.
Well, Charles, Joel, thank you so much for your insights, and we look forward to hearing more from you all at a future date.
Great, thank you.
All right, we are bumping up against the hour, so we've already moved 1 minute into Ryan Learvik's time. So Ryan, we're not going to do the pre-show banter. We're going to give you your time back. Throw Q&A in the chat, or actually, how are you doing Q&A? Do you want to do it at the end of your talk? Do you have a Q&A time period slated?
No, I prefer things